The autumn afternoon sun cast long shadows through the store windows of Morton's Boutique, one of the most prestigious shops in downtown Albany. A young girl with neatly braided hair and wearing her navy blue school uniform walked through the automatic doors, her backpack still heavy with textbooks from her AP chemistry class. The store's signature scent of vanilla and jasmine filled the air as she stepped onto the polished marble floor. Looking down at her phone, she checked her savings app one more time, $287.43. She had been saving her allowance and tutoring money for the past 3 months, determined to buy something special for her mother's upcoming birthday. Her mom had been working double shifts at the hospital, and she wanted to show her appreciation with more than just a handmade card this year. The boutique's crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as she made her way to the accessories section. Her mom had always admired the silk scarves displayed in the window, often pausing to look at them when they walked past the store together. Now, after weeks of saving and planning, she was finally here to buy one. She noticed a store employee reorganizing a nearby display, their eyes following her movements a bit too closely. She was used to this. It happened often enough in upscale stores. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself of what her father always said: "Hold your head high and know your worth." Her father, a respected attorney who had worked his way up from humble beginnings, had taught her to never let others' prejudices define her actions. Making her way to the scarf display, she carefully examined each option. There was a beautiful deep purple one with hand-painted flowers that reminded her of the garden her mom tended every spring. She checked the price tag, $225. It was within her budget, but she wanted to look at all her options before making a decision. Her straighter average hadn't come from making hasty choices after all. She moved to the jewelry section next, where elegant necklaces and bracelets caught the light. A silver pendant with a delicate heart design caught her eye. She remembered how her mom's old necklace had broken last month and how she hadn't had time to replace it because of her busy schedule at the hospital. Time seemed to flow differently in the quiet store as she methodically compared prices and designs. Other customers came and went, some carrying shopping bags from nearby luxury stores, others just browsing like her. She noticed how the same store employee who had been watching her earlier had now repositioned themselves near the entrance, speaking quietly into a handheld radio. She pushed away the uneasy feeling in her stomach. She was a paying customer, just like anyone else. The money in her savings account was just as good as anyone else's. Besides, she had promised herself she would find the perfect gift today. After nearly an hour of careful consideration, she decided the purple scarf would be perfect. Her mom loved wearing purple, saying it made her feel like royalty even after a long shift at the hospital. She could already picture her mom's face lighting up when she opened the gift, could hear her saying, "Oh honey, you shouldn't have," in that warm way of hers. But as she turned to head to the checkout counter, she noticed something had changed in the atmosphere of the store. The employee with the radio was now standing near the entrance with 2 police officers who had just walked in. Their eyes were fixed directly on her, and that familiar knot of anxiety began to form in her stomach. She straightened her shoulders and kept her expression neutral, even as her heart began to race. She was about to learn that sometimes the most important lessons in life don't come from AP classes or honor roll achievements, but from moments that test your dignity and resilience in ways you never expected. The weight of her backpack suddenly felt heavier, and the beautiful boutique with its sparkling chandeliers and marble floors began to feel more like a cage than a shopping paradise. Little did she know, this ordinary shopping trip was about to turn into a moment that would not only change her life, but would spark a conversation that her entire community needed to have. The 2 police officers moved through the store with practiced efficiency, their boots making soft sounds against the marble floor. The girl's heart pounded against her ribs as they approached, but she kept her face composed, just as her father had taught her. Years of family discussions about how to handle situations like this ran through her mind, though she had hoped she'd never need to use that knowledge. "Miss, we need you to come with us," the taller officer said, his voice carrying across the now quiet store. Other shoppers had stopped browsing, their eyes drawn to the scene unfolding before them. Some quickly looked away when she glanced in their direction, while others stared openly, already pulling out their phones. "May I ask why?" She responded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She could feel her phone in her pocket, knowing her father's number was just a few taps away. The store manager had appeared now, a woman in a crisp black suit who stood slightly behind the officers. "We've received a report that you've concealed merchandise in your backpack," the second officer stated, gesturing to her school bag. "We need you to come to the office to sort this out." The accusation hung in the air like heavy smoke. The girl felt a complicated mix of emotions: anger, humiliation, and a deep, burning sense of injustice. She thought about the AP chemistry test she'd aced that morning, the student council meeting she'd led after school, and how none of that mattered in this moment. "I haven't taken anything," she said clearly, keeping her voice level. "I'm happy to show you my backpack right here." She started to slide the bag off her shoulder, but the manager stepped forward. "We'll need to do this in the office," the manager insisted, gesturing toward the back of the store. The girl noticed how the manager wouldn't meet her eyes, focusing instead on a point somewhere over her shoulder. As they walked through the store, past racks of designer clothes and gleaming display cases, she felt the weight of every stare, heard the whispers, saw the phones recording. The purple scarf she'd planned to buy for her mom seemed to mock her from its display, a reminder of how quickly an ordinary day could turn sideways. The back office was small and stark, nothing like the elegant showroom floor. A metal desk dominated the space, with a wall of security monitors casting a bluish glow over everything. The chair they directed her to sit in was hard plastic, deliberately uncomfortable. "Empty your backpack, please," the taller officer instructed, while his partner positioned himself near the door. The manager stood by the security monitors, arms crossed. With deliberate movements, she unzipped her backpack and began removing items one by one. Her chemistry textbook, a graphing calculator, a half-eaten lunch, had a student council folder covered in positive sticky notes from her teammates. Each item she placed on the desk told the story of who she really was: a dedicated student, a leader, someone who had every right to be shopping in this store. "As you can see," she said, turning the empty backpack inside out, "there's nothing here that doesn't belong to me." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but she held herself together. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The officers exchanged glances. The manager shifted uncomfortably. "We'll need to check your pockets as well," the second officer said, though his tone had lost some of its earlier authority. She stood slowly, fighting to keep her hands from shaking as she turned out her jacket pockets. Out came her phone, her wallet with the savings she'd carefully accumulated, and a handful of pencils. No stolen merchandise. No evidence of wrongdoing. Just the ordinary possessions of a teenage girl who had wanted to buy her hard-working mother a birthday present. The silence in the room grew thick and uncomfortable. The manager had stopped making eye contact altogether, certainly very interested in the security monitors. The officer's earlier certainty seemed to be wavering, but neither was ready to admit their mistake. "I'd like to call my father now," she stated, not asking for permission. She reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. "He's an attorney, and I believe he'll want to know why I'm being detained without probable cause." The mention of her father's profession caused a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The taller officer cleared his throat, while the manager finally looked directly at her, worry creeping into her expression. "Of course you can make your call," the first officer said, trying to sound accommodating now that the situation was clearly not going as planned. "But I'm sure we can sort this out quickly." As she dialed her father's number, she thought about all the times he'd sat her down to talk about moments like this. How he'd taught her to stand up for herself while staying safe, to know her rights while being strategic about how she asserted them. She thought about her mother working long hours at the hospital, caring for others while her own daughter was being treated like a criminal for trying to buy her a gift. The phone rang once, twice, and then her father's familiar voice answered. With a calm she didn't know she possessed, she began to explain the situation. The officers and manager watched as she spoke, perhaps realizing for the first time that the young girl they had profiled was not just another faceless suspect, but someone's daughter, someone's student, someone who deserved better than this. Her father's response was immediate and clear. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't say anything else. I'm on my way." The confidence in his voice helped steady her nerves. She ended the call and sat back in the uncomfortable chair, spine straight, head held high. The next 10 minutes would feel like an eternity, But she knew something important was about to happen. This wasn't just about a false accusation anymore. It was about dignity, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right, even when your voice shakes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the store's back office as she held her phone, her father's reassuring voice still echoing in her ears. The two officers shifted their weight from foot to foot, their earlier confidence notably diminished. The store manager had retreated to the corner, pretending to be absorbed in paperwork while stealing glances at the security monitors. Taking a deep breath, she thought about how this moment would become another story in their family history, like the time her father had to explain to her why some people crossed the street when they saw him coming, even though he was wearing an expensive suit and carrying a briefcase. Or the countless times her mother came home from hospital shifts with stories about patients who requested a different nurse, despite her decades of experience and gentle touch. "Would anyone like to explain why you're holding my daughter here?" Her father had asked over the speakerphone, his voice carrying the weight of years of legal experience. The question hung in the air, met with uncomfortable silence. The taller officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we received a report of suspicious activity." "Suspicious activity," her father repeated, the words sharp and clear through the phone speaker. "Could you please define what you mean by suspicious activity? Because from what my daughter has told me, she was shopping for a birthday present for her mother." She watched as the manager's face flushed red. The younger officer looked down at his boots, while his partner struggled to maintain his authoritative stance. "We have procedures we need to follow," the manager finally spoke up, her voice smaller than before. "When we receive reports of potential shoplifting." "And what evidence did you have to support this report?" Her father interrupted. "Security footage. Witnesses? Missing merchandise? Or was my honor-roll daughter's presence in your store enough to warrant this treatment?" The silence that followed was deafening. She sat straighter in her chair, drawing strength from her father's words. The chemistry textbook and student council folder still lay spread across the metal desk, silent testimonies to who she really was. "My daughter just emptied her backpack for you." Her father continued, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of controlled anger. "She showed you her pockets. She cooperated fully, despite having no obligation to do so. Now, I'm 10 minutes away, and when I arrive, we're going to have a very serious discussion about racial profiling, false imprisonment, and the legal liability your store is currently facing." The manager's face went from red to pale. The officers exchanged glances, probably realizing that this routine stop was about to become anything but routine. "Dad," she said into the phone, her voice finally betraying a slight tremor, "I'm okay. I just wanted to buy Mom something nice for her birthday." She thought about the purple scarf still hanging on display outside, how excited she'd been just an hour ago at the thought of giving it to her mother. "I know, sweetheart," her father's voice softened. "You did nothing wrong. You remember what we've talked about? About holding your head high?" "Yes," she replied, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes but refusing to let them fall. "I remember." "Good. I'm pulling into the parking lot now. Don't say anything else until I get there." The call ended, and the office fell into another uncomfortable silence. She could feel the energy in the room shifting. The manager had moved to the door, perhaps to intercept her father before he reached the office. The officers were whispering to each other, their earlier bravado replaced by uncertainty. She thought about her mother, probably finishing up her shift at the hospital right now, completely unaware of what was happening. Her mom, who had taught her to be kind even in the face of unfairness, who worked 12-hour shifts with a smile, who deserved so much more than having her daughter treated like a criminal while trying to buy her a birthday gift. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made everyone in the room tense up. She heard a deep voice outside, her father talking to someone, his words muffled but his tone clear and professional. The manager's voice responded, high-pitched and nervous. In these final moments before her father entered the office, she felt a strange mix of emotions. There was still anger and hurt, but also a growing sense of pride. Pride in knowing who she was, regardless of how others might see her. Pride in having parents who had prepared her for moments like this, who had taught her to stand up for herself while staying safe. The door handle turned, and she took one final deep breath. She thought about all the other kids who might have faced similar situations without having a parent who dropped everything and come running, who knew the law and how to use it. Maybe, just maybe, what happened next would help make sure this didn't happen to someone else's daughter or son. The door opened, and with it came the possibility of turning this humiliating experience into something more. A teachable moment, a catalyst for change, a story that needed to be told. Her father's familiar footsteps approached, and she knew that whatever happened next would matter not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been judged before they were known. The door to the back office opened with purpose rather than force. Her father stood in the doorway, his presence filling the small space without a single word being spoken. He wore his navy court suit. He'd clearly come straight from work, and carried his worn leather briefcase, the one she used to play with as a toddler. His expression was calm, but his eyes took in everything. His daughter, her school supplies spread across the metal desk, the two officers, and the nervous store manager hovering near the security monitors. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice measured and clear. The kind of voice that commanded attention in courtrooms and boardrooms alike. "I understand there's been a serious misunderstanding here." He placed his briefcase on the desk next to his daughter's chemistry textbook, the contrast between these two worlds. Education and accusation, stark and telling. The tall officer stepped forward, attempting to take control of the situation. "Sir, we were just following standard protocol." "Standard protocol?" her father repeated, removing his phone from his pocket. "Would you mind explaining this standard protocol while I record our conversation? For accuracy purposes, of course." He pressed the record button, the small beep echoing in the tense room. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. The manager's hands twisted the hem of her black blazer. Nobody seemed eager to explain their standard protocol on record. "Let me tell you what I see," her father continued, his voice remaining professional but carrying an undercurrent of controlled anger. "I see my daughter's school supplies spread out on this desk. I see a young honor student who saved her money to buy her mother a birthday present, and I see a group of adults who decided she was suspicious before she ever opened her backpack." He moved to stand behind his daughter's chair, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She felt the warmth of his palm through her school uniform, steady and reassuring. "Now, I'd like to review your security footage," he stated, not asking but telling. "Every minute from the time my daughter entered this store until now. And while we're doing that, I'd like to know exactly what prompted this detention. What specific behaviors warranted stopping a minor without contacting her parents first?" The manager stepped forward, finally finding her voice. "We have a right to investigate potential theft." "Potential theft?" her father echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Based on what evidence? Because right now, all I'm seeing is a pattern of behavior that could cost this establishment significantly more than any prevented theft might save." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small notebook, the same one he used to take notes during important cases. "Let's talk about facts. My daughter entered your store at approximately 3:45 p.m. She spent nearly an hour looking at potential gifts for her mother. She has receipts showing the money she saved. At what point during this ordinary shopping trip did she become suspicious?" The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. The girl watched as her father flipped open his notebook, his Mont Blanc pen. A gift from his own father when he passed the bar exam, poised to take notes. "I'm particularly interested in your store's policies regarding probable cause," he continued, "and your training procedures for identifying suspicious behavior. Because from where I stand, this looks less like loss prevention and more like something far more problematic." The manager's face had gone pale. She glanced at the officers, perhaps hoping they would take control of the situation, but they seemed equally unsure how to proceed. This wasn't going according to their usual script. "The security footage," her father prompted again. "Shall we review it?" The manager moved quickly to the monitors, fingers trembling slightly as she accessed the system. The screens flickered to life, showing multiple angles of the store floor. Her father watched intently as the manager rewound the footage to her daughter's entrance. "Stop there," he said as the video showed his daughter first walking into the store. "Now let's watch this together. I want everyone in this room to see exactly what triggered your suspicions." The footage played silently. They watched as his daughter moved through the store, carefully examining items, checking price tags, comparing different pieces. Her movements were careful, deliberate, those of someone making a considered purchase, not a theft attempt. "I see a young woman shopping," her father narrated, his voice carrying years of courtroom experience. "I see her checking prices, likely comparing them against her saved money. Would anyone in this room care to point out the suspicious behavior that warranted this detention?" More silence. The younger officer had pulled out his own notebook now, but his pen remained motionless above the blank page. "This is not just about today," her father continued, his voice softening slightly. "This is about a pattern that needs to end. My daughter came here to buy a birthday present for her mother, who is probably finishing up a 12-hour shift at the hospital right now. Instead, she's being treated like a criminal based on nothing but assumptions and biases that none of you seem willing to admit to." He turned off the security footage replay and faced the room. "So here's what's going to happen next. We're going to have a conversation about making this right. Not just for my daughter, but for every person who walks into this store and deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." The girl watched as her father pulled a business card from his suit pocket, placing it deliberately on the metal desk. The embossed letters of his law firm caught the fluorescent light, a silent reminder of the power he wielded not through force, but through knowledge and determination. This was the father she knew, the man who taught her to stand up for herself with dignity, who showed her that the most powerful weapon against injustice was not anger, but educated action. In this moment, she wasn't just learning about justice, she was watching it unfold in real time. The truth began to unfold on the security monitors in front of them, frame by frame, minute by minute. The girl's father stood watching, his hands clasped behind his back, as the footage showed his daughter's entire shopping experience from multiple angles. The store manager, who had been so certain earlier, now couldn't seem to look directly at the screens. "Let's pause here," her father said, pointing to a moment when his daughter was carefully examining the purple silk scarf. "Notice how she's checking the price tag, then looking at her phone. My daughter was checking her savings app, wasn't she, sweetheart?" She nodded, pulling out her phone to show the app's balance. $287.43, she said quietly. "I've been saving since Mom mentioned liking the scarves in the window 3 months ago." The footage continued playing. They watched as she moved through the store methodically, never once attempting to conceal anything, never acting in any way that could be considered suspicious. Other customers could be seen in the background, some doing exactly the same thing she had done, examining items, checking prices, putting things back, yet none of them had been detained. "Now," her father said, his voice carrying the weight of years of similar cases, "I'd like to know what specific behaviors prompted your staff to contact the police." He turned to face the store manager. "Because this footage shows nothing but a young customer shopping respectfully in your store." The manager shifted uncomfortably, looking between the officers as if hoping they would jump in to help. But the officers remained silent, perhaps recognizing that this situation had evolved far beyond a routine shoplifting call. "Was it when she checked prices carefully?" Her father continued, his questions precise and measured. "When she compared different items? Or was it simply when she walked through your door?" The younger officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we responded to a call about suspicious behavior." "Yes, let's talk about that call," her father interrupted smoothly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small recorder. "With your permission, I'd like to formally record these statements. You mentioned suspicious behavior. Could you please specify, for the record, what behaviors were reported?" The silence that followed was deafening. The manager had stopped even pretending to look at paperwork. The older officer's earlier confidence had completely evaporated. "Let me help you," her father offered, his voice remaining professional but carrying an edge of controlled anger. "In my 20 years of practicing law, I've seen this scenario play out countless times. A young person of color enters an upscale store. They take their time shopping, comparing prices, being careful with their money. And somehow, mysteriously, this ordinary shopping behavior becomes suspicious enough to warrant police involvement." He turned back to the security footage, now showing his daughter carefully putting back a necklace she had considered. "Look at this moment. My daughter handling merchandise with care, respecting your products, comparison shopping like any smart consumer would. Yet someone in your store saw this and decided to call the police." The girl watched as her father navigated this moment with the same precision he used in courtrooms. She thought about all the times he'd come home from work, tired but determined, talking about similar cases he handled. How he'd always told her that education and dignity were the most powerful tools for change. The truth is clear on these monitors, he continued, gesturing to the screens. But there's a bigger truth we need to address. This isn't just about today. It's about a pattern of behavior that affects countless young people who look like my daughter. People who have every right to shop in your store without being presumed guilty. He turned to address everyone in the room. Every time something like this happens, it leaves a mark, not just on the person being falsely accused, but on our entire community. My daughter came here today to buy a birthday gift for her mother, who spent the last 12 hours saving lives at the hospital. Instead, she's being taught a different kind of lesson about how the world might view her. The security footage continued to play silently in the background, a constant reminder of the baseless nature of the accusations. The manager had moved to the corner of the room, her earlier authority completely deflated. The officers were now taking their own notes, perhaps realizing the serious implications of their hasty response. But here's the opportunity, her father said, his tone shifting slightly. We can let this be just another incident that gets brushed under the rug, or we can use it as a moment for real change. Your store can be part of the problem, or it can be part of the solution. He reached into his briefcase again, pulling out a business card holder. I work with several organizations that provide anti-bias training for retail establishments. They have an excellent track record of helping stores improve their security protocols while eliminating discriminatory practices. The manager finally found her voice. We would be interested in learning more about that training. Her father nodded, satisfaction flickering across his face. Good, because that's going to be step one in making this right, not just for my daughter, but for every customer who walks through your doors. The truth revealed in the security footage had done more than just clear his daughter's name, it had opened a door for meaningful change. As she watched her father continue to handle the situation with grace and strategic precision, she realized that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't outrage, but educated action that leads to lasting improvement. The back office had become eerily quiet, with only the soft hum of the security monitors filling the space. The girl's father stood in the center of the room, his presence somehow making the small office feel even smaller. He'd loosened his tie slightly, the only visible sign of the emotion he was controlling beneath his professional demeanor. Let me share something with you, he began, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. When I was in law school, I used to keep a small notebook. In it, I wrote down every time someone followed me in a store, every time a clerk asked to double-check my credit card, every time someone clutched their purse tighter when I walked by. He paused, letting his words sink in. Do you know why I kept that notebook? He looked directly at the store manager, who had finally stopped fidgeting with her blazer. Because I knew that someday I'd be standing in a room like this, having a conversation exactly like this one, and I wanted to remember every detail of how it feels. The younger officer shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his notepad now forgotten in his hand. The older officer had removed his cap, perhaps unconsciously showing respect for the gravity of the moment. Today, my daughter was doing something beautiful, saving her money to buy a gift for her mother. But instead of being treated like a valued customer, she was treated like a suspect. Let's talk about what that means, not just legally, but humanly. He opened his briefcase again, this time pulling out a folder filled with statistics and reports. In the past year alone, there have been over 300 documented cases of racial profiling in retail establishments in this city. That's not counting the countless unreported incidents where people simply walked away, too humiliated or afraid to speak up. The manager started to speak. We have protocols. Yes, let's discuss those protocols, he interrupted smoothly. Because I've reviewed your store's published policies, and nowhere do they state that young customers should be followed, surveilled, and detained without evidence. In fact, your own corporate guidelines specifically prohibit profiling based on race, age, or appearance. He spread several documents on the desk, right next to his daughter's scattered school supplies. These are copies of recent court decisions involving similar incidents. This one resulted in a $500,000 settlement. This one led to a complete overhaul of store policies across an entire retail chain. But more importantly, each one represents someone's child, someone's family member, someone who walked into a store expecting to be treated with basic dignity. The girl watched her father, feeling a mix of pride and emotion. She thought about all the times he'd come home tired from fighting similar battles in courtrooms, yet still made time to help her with homework or listen to her stories about school. The problem isn't just what happened today, he continued, his voice growing softer but more intense. The problem is what happens tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. How many other young people will walk through your doors and face the same assumptions? How many other parents will get phone calls like the one I received today? He turned to the officers next, and let's talk about police resources. You were called away from potentially serious matters to investigate a teenage girl buying a birthday present. How many similar calls do you receive? How many times are you asked to be the enforcers of someone else's prejudices? The older officer cleared his throat. Sir, we understand your concerns. Understanding isn't enough anymore, her father replied firmly. We need action. We need change. And it needs to start right here, right now, in this room. He pulled out another document from his briefcase. This is a proposal for a comprehensive training program. It includes bias recognition, de-escalation techniques, and proper protocols for loss prevention that don't rely on stereotypes. I've implemented similar programs in other establishments, and the results speak for themselves. Decreased incidents, increased customer satisfaction, and better community relations. The manager leaned forward, looking at the document with genuine interest for the first time. Our corporate office would need to. Your corporate office will be very interested in implementing these changes, he interrupted gently, especially when they understand the alternative. Because this incident, it's not going away with a simple apology. It's going to become either a story of failure or a story of progress. The choice is yours. He walked over to his daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder. My daughter is going to go home today and tell her mother what happened. But the story she tells, whether it's about a store that refused to change or about a place that recognized its mistakes and committed to doing better, that's up to you. The room fell silent again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the tense silence of earlier, but rather the quiet that comes when people are truly thinking, truly considering their next steps. Change isn't easy, her father acknowledged, his voice softening slightly. It requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our assumptions, but it's necessary, and it's possible. I've seen it happen, one store, one policy, one conversation at a time. He gathered his documents back into his briefcase, movements deliberate and measured. So now we have a choice to make. We can let this be just another incident report filed away and forgotten, or we can use it as a catalyst for real, meaningful change. The kind of change that ensures no other child has to call their parent from a back office trying to explain why they're being treated like a criminal for trying to buy a gift. The confrontation had transformed from a moment of accusation into an opportunity for education and growth. As her father finished speaking, the atmosphere in the room had shifted from defensive tension to thoughtful consideration. Sometimes the most powerful confrontations aren't fought with raised voices, but with unwavering truth and the courage to demand better. 2 weeks had passed since that day in the store's back office. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the high school auditorium as students filed in for the special assembly. The girl stood behind the podium, adjusting her note cards while glancing at her parents in the front row. Her mother wore the purple silk scarf, yes, the same one from the store, which the manager had personally delivered to their home along with a heartfelt apology. My story isn't unique, she began, her voice clear and strong. What makes it different is what happened afterward. The auditorium fell silent as hundreds of students and teachers leaned in to listen. She shared everything. The excitement of shopping for her mom's birthday gift, the sudden appearance of the police officers, the humiliation of emptying her backpack, and most importantly, the way her father had transformed a moment of injustice into an opportunity for change. The store didn't just apologize, she continued. They took action. She clicked to the next slide in her presentation, showing pictures of the store's staff participating in comprehensive anti-bias training. Every employee, from the CEO to the newest sales associate, went through a program designed to recognize and eliminate unconscious bias. The images showed diverse groups of people engaged in discussions, role-playing scenarios, and working together to create new store policies. Her father had helped develop the training program, drawing from his years of experience in civil rights law. But the change didn't stop there, she said, clicking to the next slide. The store's corporate headquarters decided to implement these changes across all their locations nationwide. That means hundreds of stores, thousands of employees, and countless customers will benefit from what happened that day. She paused, looking at her mother, who was dabbing at her eyes with the corner of the purple scarf. My mom always says that hard moments can become turning points if we let them. This turned out to be one of those moments. The next slide showed statistics from the store's first month after implementing the new policies. Customer complaints had dropped significantly. Sales had actually increased. But most importantly, there hadn't been a single incident of racial profiling reported. The police officers who responded that day, they're now part of a community outreach program. She showed a picture of the two officers leading a workshop with local teenagers about rights and responsibilities. They're using their experience to help bridge the gap between law enforcement and young people of color. In the audience, her father nodded encouragingly. He had worked with the police department to develop this program, turning another potential adversary into an ally for change. The store manager who called the police that day, she clicked to the next slide. She's now leading diversity and inclusion training sessions at other stores. She told me that what happened changed her perspective completely. She said she never wants another young person to feel the way she made me feel. The audience murmured as she showed pictures of the manager speaking to groups of retail employees, sharing her story as a cautionary tale and a call to action. But the biggest change? She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. It's happening right here, in our school, in our community. We've started a student advocacy group that works with local businesses to prevent racial profiling. We're not just talking about change, we're making it happen. She clicked to show pictures of their student group meeting with store owners, creating educational materials and organizing workshops. What had started as one incident in one store had sparked a movement. Last week, something amazing happened, she continued, smiling. I went back to the store to buy a birthday present for my best friend. The same security guard who had watched me suspiciously before. He smiled and asked if I needed help finding anything. It might seem like a small thing, but it represents something huge. Her presentation switched to show before and after customer satisfaction surveys from various stores that had implemented the new training program. The improvement was dramatic. My father taught me that change doesn't always come from big protests or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it comes from quiet moments of dignity, from refusing to let injustice pass unchallenged, from being willing to turn painful experiences into opportunities for growth. She looked at her parents again, seeing the pride in their eyes. Her mother touched the purple scarf gently, and her father gave her a subtle thumbs up. So yes, I was racially profiled while trying to buy my mom a birthday present, but that's not where the story ends. That moment became a catalyst for change that's still rippling outward. Every time a young person walks into that store, or any store that's implemented these new policies, and is treated with respect and dignity, that's part of our story too. She showed the final slide. A simple photo of the store's entrance, with its new welcome sign that read, "All are welcome here," in multiple languages. The best part, she concluded, her voice strong and clear. This is just the beginning. Because now we know that change is possible. We know that one voice, one moment, one story can make a difference. And we know that when we stand up for what's right, we're never standing alone. The auditorium erupted in applause as she stepped away from the podium. Her mother enveloped her in a tight hug, the silk scarf soft against her cheek. Her father squeezed her shoulder, just as he had done in that back office 2 weeks ago. As students and teachers came up to share their own stories and ask how they could get involved, she realized that what had started as one of the worst days of her life had transformed into something powerful and positive. The resolution wasn't just about one store or one incident. It was about creating lasting change, one conversation, one policy, one person at a time. Her mother always said that happy endings aren't really endings at all. They're just new beginnings in disguise. Standing there in the auditorium, surrounded by people eager to be part of the change, she knew this was exactly that kind of beginning.